Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Well, it is the end of an era in Canadian politics.
This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
An historic moment for Canadians as Justin Trudeau, Canada's 23rd Prime Minister and one of the country's longest-serving leaders, announced he will be resigning. After months of embattled leadership, and after narrowly surviving his government's defeat in the House of Commons, as well as a revolt from his caucus, Justin Trudeau is calling it a career.
Last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister.
He will stay on until the Liberal Party has chosen a new leader. That is expected to happen before the end of March. The country will then soon after be plunged into a federal election campaign. If today's polls are accurate, the result of that election would be a massive majority for the Conservative Party of Canada, with Pierre Poilievre as Canada's next Prime Minister. The Liberal Party, known as Canada's natural governing party, is faced with the monumental task of choosing a new leader and becoming election-ready in just a few short months. The opposition parties are speaking in unison following Trudeau's announcement. The Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and the Conservatives are all ready to go to the polls.
So we are facing the same people with the same values, the same ideology. We have to go in elections.
Whatever the vote is, there will be a vote of confidence. New Democrats will be voting against this government for an election where Canadians will have a choice.
Everything's out of control, and now the government is out of control. This cannot go on. We need a carbon tax election now.
So what's going to happen next? I'm David Smith, and this is The Big Story. And I'm joined today by two of the best political minds in Ottawa. Susan Smith is a Liberal. She is the principal of Blue Sky Strategy Group. Hello, Susan.
Hello there, David. Happy New Year.
You as well. And Tim Powers is a Conservative. He is the chair of Summa Strategies and the managing director of the national polling firm Abacus Data. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Smith squared. Two Smiths to start the new year. It's almost like two whiskeys. Let's light her up, Dave.
The name's so nice you say it twice. Listen, let's dive right into it here. It's a very busy day. We're taping this now in the evening on Monday. You've had some time to digest Trudeau's resignation announcement. How do you think he handled it today? What is your general reaction to this historic moment in Canadian politics? Susan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's so funny. January 6th is a day that has a different connotation in a different country just south of the border. And you can't help but think a bit about peaceful transition of power. I think the Prime Minister handled a very difficult moment with dignity. I think it would be fair to say it was not exactly what he wanted, nor was it perhaps the timing that he would have liked to have in terms of saying that he was going to step aside as Prime Minister and leader and call a leadership contest. But he handled it with dignity. He had an opportunity to talk about some of the things that he'd been able to accomplish as Prime Minister in terms of child poverty and reducing child poverty, dealing with reconciliation and making that a different kind of conversation in this country. And I think it was a good thing. I think it was too late. It would have been more helpful if it had happened sooner in terms of the party's fortunes. But I think there's an opportunity now here to turn the page and inject some good oxygen into the room when it comes to the next federal election.
Tim, what are your thoughts on the events of the day and Trudeau's resignation?
Well, I think it was a year too late for the fortunes and future of the Liberal Party, though, as we saw in the World Junior Hockey Championships, David, if Latvia can beat Canada, I suppose anything is possible. But I don't know if you get a repeat of that particular championship when it comes to Liberal politics at the moment. It's clear the Prime Minister in his remarks today was, legacy framing. It tend to when you announce you're resigning. because his comments reflected the frustration I think Canadians have about him not connecting with them on affordability. You heard him talk more about climate change and a regret he had about not addressing parliamentary reform, which is sort of funny because he had a majority in which to do it. All that said, I mean, it is one of those days where you're never going to satisfy everybody. I thought physically, though, looking at the prime minister in some ways, he did look like he was relieved. And I think leaders do become relieved when they finally get to a place of decision making, whether they're happy with the decision that they made or not. Um, as always, I love my friend Susan's optimism, but the prime minister has landed a plane that's on fire with about 100 meters of runway left, hoping that the fire can be put off and somehow it'll take off again. He hasn't done his would-be successors because of the timing, because of the lateness of it, because of a number of different things, any great shakes in improving their fortunes. But as I say, there's always Latvia, David. We must not forget that.
Yeah, I went to those hockey games and I cheered for Latvia. It was pretty exciting. Not the Team Canada one, but, Tim's right. The runway is short, but there's still runway. I wouldn't argue that the plane is necessarily completely on fire. There might be a bit of smoke coming out of it. But what the prime minister has done has actually changed the channel in a number of cases. He's changed the channel, or he's enabled the channel to be changed for the Liberal Party. A Liberal leadership will bring some positive energy, some new ideas, some positive profile to the party. It also changes the channel a bit for Mr. Poilievre, or forces them to rethink it. It takes some energy and attention away from Mr. Poilievre. He can still keep putting out those interesting videos with slightly weird soundtracks. But it actually will force people to push. It will force them to look at it seriously. The Conservatives were all set to run a Justin Trudeau Wrecked Your Lives campaign. And now they don't have Justin Trudeau as the bogeyman or the opponent. They'll still try to dredge him up. There's no question. But if the new leader comes from outside of cabinet or outside of the sitting caucus, it'll be a little bit more difficult for Mr. Poilievre's narrative. And so the PM has allowed, by stepping aside, he's created some opportunities where there weren't. And he's perhaps, stuck a fork in the wrench of Mr. Poilievre's bicycle.
Yeah, I think we can agree that Trudeau not being the leader is I don't know if blow seems like a strong word, Tim, but it's inconvenient for the Conservatives. They had spent a lot of time constructing a campaign around running against Trudeau specifically. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think inconvenience is the right word, but I think that regardless of who the leader is, with maybe two exceptions, and those exceptions are Christy Clark and Mark Carney, who would be a little harder to target and tar with a lot of the Trudeau record, but anybody from the cabinet who may put their hand up and may be successful is going to have a hard time running away from the paintbrush that Pierre Poilievre has hauled out to paint them all as the same type of Liberal. But I think the Conservatives will take comfort in that. There still seems to be a mood, and it's only early, of course, since the Prime Minister's resigned. It's not even 24 hours yet as we're talking about it, not even 12 as we're talking about it, but there still seems to be this national mood of expressing anger at the incumbent government. So while there might be a new head of that incumbent government sometime in March, I'm guessing, that person is going to have to find a way to deflate that anger fairly quickly and connect with Canadians in a manner that I don't think we've ever seen before. And we've seen historical examples where leaders have changed. So long-term prime ministers have stepped down. There's been quick leadership changes. There have been acceleration, ascension in the polls. But what happens in an election campaign? They get brought back to life fairly quickly. John Turner, when he took over from Justin Trudeau's father, and Kim Campbell when she took over from Brian Mulroney, are two examples of that. So yeah, there's no doubt you get a pop from a leadership race. There's no doubt it'll be a little more inconvenient for the Conservatives, but the challenge still, I think, rests with the Liberals to undo or fix some kind of Rubik's Cube puzzle with, 4 to 5 months to do it, which
Yeah.
isn't a lot of time.
Yeah, and Susan Smith, to Tim's point there, who is the front runners? Do you have any names in terms of who looks good to be the next Liberal Party leader at this point?
Well, there's only one name that's actually in the race right now, and it's a guy named Frank Baylis. And people can look him up, Google him. He's a business guy from Montreal. He's a former MP with the Liberals for the first term in 2015. And he's the one who's come out right away. There's been a lot of activity over the holiday season. We know that Chrystia Freeland was making calls. We know that Mark Carney was making calls. We know that Christy Clark had her French tutor with her on vacation, working on her French and making calls at the same time. So there's been some work going on. I think what's surprising me actually is some of the names who I thought automatically would be in may not be stepping into the race. I've heard from a number of sources, perhaps that François-Philippe Champagne, who's someone people thought would be running, may not put his hat in the ring this time. Not too sure about Mélanie Joly either. I've heard her campaign's gone a little bit quiet, though it was quite a well-advanced organization in my understanding. But the names people seem to be talking about, Tim's mentioned two of them from the outside. Christy Clark, the former Premier of British Columbia, and Mark Carney, the former Governor of the Bank of Canada and Governor of the Bank of England. He also was a public servant at the Department of Finance, and he's done some time in the private sector. Those are the names that people are talking about. Dominic LeBlanc's name has come up. Anita Anand as a possibility. So it will be interesting. The other one that's kind of interesting, Karina Gould, she's a young, fresh face. People put their names forward in leadership contests for various reasons. She's been viewed as highly competent. I think people will be pleasantly surprised when they speak to her. But I think it will be a challenge for anybody who's inside the tent versus someone who's been outside the tent for a while.
Yeah, Tim, anything to add on there? What names do you like in terms of the ones that are being thrown around right now?
Yeah, I think the interesting one in there is Dominic LeBlanc. I think of all the people that both Susan and I have named, he's probably the one with the most prodigious political skill set, and also the one who tentacles across not just the Liberal Party, but different parties and different people. He gets along with Doug Ford and others. So Dominic's interesting. I guess the question to ask, and it's probably the question that these would-be leadership candidates are asking themselves is this a two kind of election strategy for me? And am I prepared to get into it? Because I think because the expectations are so low right now, these leadership candidates probably internally want to keep them a little low. So if the expectation is somehow today the Liberal Party would do worse than it did in 2011, and whoever succeeds, Justin Trudeau does better than 2011, they may get a second chance, and that second chance may be the more opportune one. So that's the kind of stuff I'll be looking for. And as is always the case, Dave, the rules. What are the rules like? How do the Liberals set up the rules? Because the rules can often define whether or not even somebody's candidacy is even possible or not.
The timeline for choosing a new Liberal Party leader is key here for the Liberals. Parliament is now prorogued until March 24th. The Liberal Party constitution requests 4 months for a leadership race, although, as Tim mentions, the party board can shorten that time frame if they so choose. We're waiting to hear later this week what's going to happen with those actual rules. But the brass tacks is that the government will likely fall pretty much as soon as Parliament returns on March 24th. There will be a confidence vote right away. How quickly, and Susan, I'll ask you, you're the Liberal here, how quickly do you think the party can organize a leadership race, and how much time will they try to give that new leader before an election is called?
Yeah, those are all very good questions, and they don't have the answers to that yet. I was chuckling because I attempted to listen to Pierre Poilievre's interview with Jordan Peterson this weekend, and I sped it up to 2 times, but I still couldn't get through it. This is what the Liberal Party is going to have to do. They're going to have to speed up the Liberal leadership process. The executive has the latitude to shorten what's usually a 4-month process. They'll shorten it down. And I think they'll be able to put someone in place and get a throne speech in place in time for Parliament to resume. And that's the first thing that has to happen when Parliament resumes after prorogation is a throne speech. And then there are ultimately votes on the throne speech. So I think March is realistic. It will be tight, but the result of that will be a road-tested candidate, to the sense that whoever the winner is will have come off of a series of debates. They'll be they'll be on their top game when it comes to discourse and debate, if you like. And I think some good thinking will have gone into the throne speech, because it will ultimately be what is the Liberal election platform. If they fall on it, it has to be something they're willing to run on. So it's going to be super interesting. It'll be a speedy window of time for some, slow for others. It will allow the other parties time to figure out what their game plan is going to be now that they don't have Trudeau in the window. It's somebody else, but they have to figure out who that somebody else is. So I think it can be done. That's the good thing about democracy. And it's going to be interesting to watch. But I think there are a bunch of people who are lacing up their running shoes, and anybody who's covering it better have some tightly laced shoes too, because it'll move quickly.
Tim, what are your thoughts on what awaits the new Liberal Party leader, whomever it might be?
Well, yeah, I just think structurally they want to borrow from what the PC Ontario Party did after Patrick Brown had to resign in a scandal. They were able to have a short race. They got serious candidates. It seemed to work out well. Obviously worked out very well for Doug Ford, but it allowed a short, focused race. You got in serious people who could do it, and it provided also a cleansing of whatever the stench was that may have been left by the previous leader. Look, there's almost no margin for error for whomever the new Liberal leader is. He or she is going to have to perform exceptionally well, which may weigh into the assessment that would-be electors make. Does Christy Clark get a hand up over Mark Carney, given she's seen as a pretty good campaigner, or again Dominic LeBlanc, because they're going to go from one campaign into another. They're going to be exhausted. They're going to be tired. The pressure is going to be enormous. And they're going to have the weight of the Liberal Party and an incumbent government on their shoulders. So it's not for the faint of heart.
I think there's a couple things that are going to be interesting. One, Poilievre has had 2 years kind of unfettered. The Liberals have not done a good job of challenging him and the Conservatives and their narrative. And but they haven't really, Canadians, I don't think have 100% decided if they want to invite him home for dinner yet. They're thinking about it, but they haven't really decided. And now they will eventually have someone to measure him up against. That's one thing that I think will be interesting. And that's as an outcome of a new Liberal leadership race. The other thing that's important to think about is the Ford factor. Tim brought up Doug Ford's name. Doug Ford has been hinting, he dodged a bit today about calling a snap election in Ontario so that he can take advantage of the current political situation, both federally and provincially, when it comes to the Liberal Party. If he does that, that will use up time and energy also of Conservative supporters, volunteers, and donors. And that will have an impact on Mr. Poilievre as well. Poilievre will still be chomping at the bit, but in a big voter-rich place like Ontario, having some people a bit electioned out by the time a federal election is called, maybe 6 to 7 or 8 weeks later after a provincial one, that will be an interesting factor. So we'll see if Mr. Ford goes to the polls early and what that does.
Okay. Moving along here, what does this mean for the country more broadly outside of the fishbowl of Ottawa politics? We're now effectively leaderless. We have a lame duck prime minister in the most extreme sense of the phrase. Donald Trump takes office in 2 weeks on January 20th. Right now, there's nothing to indicate Canada will be spared from a 25% import tariff if Trump wants to move forward with that. Tim Powers, this is bad, right? This is bad timing for political chaos in Ottawa.
The worst in many ways. Though I know Susan will be happy with this as well too if the reporting is accurate. But David, you have lots of people who are small business owners there in your audience. And Susan and I were very much aligned on this. Apparently, some good news in the Justin Trudeau resignation today for everybody, particularly those of us in the business sphere, that capital gains measures that were brought forward in the April budget are apparently not going to go through because of prorogation. So if that's true, that's good. So I'll take a little bit of chaos to get a personal tax break, let me tell you. But for the country, look, the prime minister, I get, wants to focus on Canada-U.S. relations, as he should if he were staying in the job, but clearly the president has no time for him. There's no real, there's stability, I suppose, in that we know what we're getting with Justin Trudeau and his cabinet. They'll all still be in place, but there's no legislation going forward. They're limited in what they can actually do. So it's not a great time for this to happen, but democracy is democracy, and sometimes it's a chaotic hot mess, and other times it works more efficiently. But we're in the chaotic hot mess period, Dave.
Tim's right, though, Dave. We do have a government. We do have a prime minister. We do have a cabinet, and we do have a public service. And that work continues. And we know, I know because I've talked to people, Tim would know the same thing. For months, Canada has been getting ready for what they thought were going to be the CUSMA, USMCA, NAFTA 2.0, whatever you call it, renegotiation with the American administration, which was set to happen in 2026. But there's stuff that's going on already. Mr. Trump won. That work continued. But then with his tweet on the 25th of November, where he said, tariffs, 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 that stepped everything up even further. And our federal leaders, both political and their officials, I think about Ambassador Kirsten Hillman in the States, who is a career public servant and leading trade negotiator for Canada, our premiers, our mayors, our business leaders, they're all people who've been deployed in the process of trying to mitigate what Trump's going to do. But make no mistake, Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and it does not matter who is in the chair, whether you're a blue stripe, an orange stripe, a red stripe, a green stripe. Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump does on January 20th. So Canada continues to push ahead and work to try to mitigate that at all levels. And I think that's actually an important message to convey to people.
Okay. Another point I'd like to touch on with both of you, there's a grim kind of irony about the Liberals' current predicament. More than a decade ago when Trudeau took the helm, the party was in disarray, low in the polls, kind of lost. He really built it back up in his own image. Now we've come nearly full circle with the country's winningest federal party in their worst state in history in terms of public support. So, Susan, how do Liberals go about the monumental challenge of rebuilding this party?
Yeah, that's a good question. The Conservatives dump their leaders typically in opposition. You think of Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole before Pierre Poilievre came in. It's a bit easier to get yourself reorganized in opposition than when you're in government. Not that I'm asking to go into opposition to do so. How do Liberals, they need to rally behind the party. I think they were feeling disgruntled. Many people had voted Liberals, either Liberal in the past, think the party's tilted too far to the left. Maybe they were going to stay home the next election. Hopefully, a leadership and the resulting new leader will, if Tim was going to get personal on the tech stuff, hopefully the party comes more to the center. I live in the world of blue Liberals, and I think there are lots of people in this country who do. They like the happy middle, the middle there. So they need to pull the party back there. Hopefully those ideas and agenda will come forward, and they'll rally behind whomever the new leader is. And hopefully that new leader inspires people, A, to look hard, A, to show up and vote, B, to look hard at what their choices are and not make a knee-jerk reaction. I'll take the other guy because he's new and not been around for a while. But when you look at what the country is being faced with from an economics perspective, I think they need to make the decisions about the people who have the experience and the integrity and the vision for the kind of Canada that they're looking for. And hopefully the new Liberal leader is able to put that kind of optimistic vision forward. But the Prime Minister today was talking about the lack of ambition in Mr. Poilievre's message to Canadians. So that's what Liberals and we'll have to do, but it's beyond Liberals. It's ordinary Canadians will have to decide themselves, as they do every few years for an election, what kind of people, what kind of government they want to lead their country.
Tim, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's just when I first met Susan, I was at the end of working in the Brian Mulroney government, and Kim Campbell came aboard. And
We're not that old.
no, it must have been our children. It must have been our children. And that Susan went into the new Chrétien government. And it just, for me, David, it feels like that time, not to the same degree because the Liberal Party has more structure than the old PC party did, but I just feel like regardless of who the leader is, that person is, for their own misfortune, I think it's just going. I don't think the Liberals are going to get knocked down to 2 seats. I'm not saying that, but I just think the new Liberal leader just doesn't have enough time nor a political climate that's truly open to having a competitive Liberal option presented to them right now. There just is. We see it in the data. Angus Reid had some data out this weekend that forecasts what a new Liberal leader may do. I think Chrystia Freeland was up at 21 points from 16, and Mark Carney was slightly behind her. I mean, that's just the Canadian mood at the moment, and I think the best the Liberals can hope for, and this is not to be arrogant as it relates to the Conservative fortunes, is for a higher than expected showing than kissing the pavement, which is what it looks like is going to happen to them right now.
Tim, if I can stick with you for a second, the strategy for the Conservatives now, do you expect any pivoting on the messaging? What are they going to be doing in the next number of days and weeks in anticipation of a new leader of the Liberal Party?
I think you saw that just before Christmas, and you saw it again today in Pierre Poilievre's video, or Monday's video, which was making sure that you're spraying, painting, pick whatever metaphor you want, the Liberal Party as all one homogenous entity, which is a typical opposition tactic and tends to work when there is the public mood that we have. So whether it's leader A, leader B, leader C, they're all the same, and they were part and parcel of what happened over the last number of years. And you Canadians just don't want to put these guys in right now. You want to punish them. So I think you're going to see what Poilievre has been good at is a disciplined approach. I think he's going to have to broaden the target as he has, but stay disciplined on reminding people as to why they see him as more effective at delivering on their affordability woes and releasing them from that pain than whatever A, B, C, D, or E Liberal leader may be.
And Susan, over to you. If you're advising a new Liberal leader on the other side of the equation, what should they be focused on in terms of key themes, messaging, once the leadership race, once that period is over and the focus turns to Poilievre, what should the strategy be there?
Yeah, that's a good question, David. I think talking about the economy, driving home items that are issues that are kitchen table issues, but showing that Canada can be a country that is solid, looking after its people, and play a reasonable and responsible role in the world. I think we have to stay away from lofty rhetoric. And Mr. Poilievre has done a good job with his rhymes and his slogans on that. I'm not advocating that from the Liberal side of things, but I would counsel whomever the new leader is not to out-policy want people. You have to go to what people care about in their hearts and at their kitchen tables, and they have to find a way to articulate that and capture that. I do think people have faith in Canada as a country. I don't think people think this country is broken. I, for one, do not, and I suspect my good friend Tim Powers does not either. So we have to see what people are, what's really making them tick by the time an election comes around, and find a way to connect with that.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of our time today. Look, it's been a momentous occasion, a historical moment for Canadians and for those of us who watch politics closely in this country. It's going to be a fascinating few months as all of this plays out. Tim Powers and Susan Smith, thank you both so much for joining the show today, helping us make sense of what's going on. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Again, that is Susan Smith, principal of Blue Sky Strategy Group, and Tim Powers, chair of Summa Strategies and managing director of Abacus Data, joining me in Ottawa today. That was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. We love hearing from you. You can find the show on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Thank you for listening.